Yo dudes, enjoy some background footage while I talk about stuff. If you frequently play or watch DBD, then you know about tunneling. In order to remove a survivor from the game early on and to gain a huge advantage, the killer prioritizes a specific survivor over the others and hooks them in relatively quick succession until they're out. It's a pretty unfun strategy to play against as a survivor, and it feels awful and scummy that you have to do it as the killer sometimes just to keep up. Unfortunately for the game's health, it's a very popular thing for killers to do, because the 3v1 advantage that it grants is just so huge. Folks like Otz and Scott Jund have talked about potential solutions to solve this. There were ideas around mechanically empowering survivors against tunneling, or mechanically rewarding killers for spreading hooks, which all brought some other kind of serious problems with them. There was also more of a people-based approach with a kind request for the community to change for the better, but I just don't think that's going to happen. As much as I would like it to, DBD killer players tunnel because it's easy and strong. That's just what humans do, it's the path of least resistance. The community isn't just going to change for some goodwill, even though I do agree that it should, and I like that approach a little more. If we want to really prevent tunneling, we have to make changes to the core game system to take tunneling from possible to impossible. In a moment, I'm going to introduce an idea that uproots something that's been in Dead by Daylight for basically its entire lifetime, just so tunneling can be fixed. I invite you to listen with an open mind and let the possibility marinate in your brain for a little before you completely reject it. After giving you the main idea and a few sub-variations of it, I'm going to go in depth about how this core change would affect gameplay for survivors, killers, overall perk metas, and finally some problems and special considerations to be made with this sort of idea. I'll add the timestamps on screen for a little bit, and in the description of course, so you can always go back to certain sections. So, the way to fix tunneling is to introduce a shared survivor hook pool, a total number of hook stages that each survivor player draws from in order to stay alive when they get hooked. To make this work properly, we would definitely have to reduce the total number of hooks in the game, but I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in the problems and considerations section. When all the shared hooks have been depleted, there are a couple different variations of what could happen in the endgame. In the first flavor, when there are no more hooks, it becomes equivalent to if all survivors were on death hook in the current system. For any given survivor, one more hook means they're sacrificed and out of the trial. In the second flavor, rather than needing one final hook per survivor to take them out, the game would immediately end upon hook pool depletion. This could make use of something like the finisher Mori system that was in PTB a few months ago, but I don't really like this one as much as the first flavor because the transition would probably be a bit clunky and it could be seen as like a public shaming or humiliation of the last survivor. Maybe a third flavor could just make the survivors more able when the hook pools run out. This makes plenty of sense to me in terms of game mechanics, but it might be more of a thematic issue because it's not resolving in a bunch of sacrifices to the entity. I guess neither is the finisher Mori though. Anyway, regardless of which version you choose, let's talk about what it would do for the game. First of all, like the video title says, tunneling would be fixed because it would be literally impossible to get someone out of the game early. Survivors would receive quite a large buffer before they can be fully removed from the trial. If the killer comes back for you off the hook, it's not the end of the world. There's still plenty of space to play. This would actually create an incentive for players who had a poor first chase to stick around and not DC immediately. Was it a fluke down or not? Because they're no longer halfway to their demise right off the bat, should the killer try to abuse them, they now have a much better opportunity to prove themselves and make good use of the rest of the team's hook stages, instead of immediately going into that dreaded 3v1 scenario. This benefit can also make archive challenges and quirky perk builds that threaten to throw the game a bit more bearable. Now you can do your challenge, pull off the fancy gimmick, eat a hook, and get back into the game because you're not dead yet. And if people are using these alternative builds more, that means that the gen rushing ones or otherwise full meta perk builds are being used a bit less. Kind of going in the other direction now, new team strategies could emerge because survivors wouldn't have to worry about spreading hooks as a necessity if they wanted to get a 4-person escape. If you're familiar with competitive Super Smash Bros. Melee doubles, think about something like stock tanking. In DBD terms, basically certain survivors could play in a very risky manner, being in charge of looping or taking aggro from the killer, while others could play more defensively, specializing in stealthing out and doing gens, but not necessarily being a detriment to their whole team if they decide to stick to that, rather than going to take a hit for someone who would have been on death hook in the current game system. On the killer side of things, this would bring about much more interesting gameplay and strategy. Tunneling, or even soft tunneling, whatever that is no longer such an obvious best choice as an overall game plan. They would have to weigh the time it would take to wait for their target to be unhooked versus using that time to just get in a new chase. There's no strict benefit to chasing the same person anymore, since they can't really get a survivor out early. Camping very early on in the match would be even less viable than it is now. If you stay there for the duration of the entire hook pool while there's still gens remaining, you're guaranteeing a 1k. And this isn't the guaranteed 1k that a Bubba with Deadlock, No Ed, No Way Out gets. It's an actual, you aren't getting more than 1 kill unless they super hard greed 1k. If it's unsafe to unhook, survivors just won't do it anymore because they have that buffer, they have the leeway to. This design would make killers prioritize finding those new chases quickly, rather than hanging around the hook to advance their win condition. Because of the reduced total number of hooks in the game, long, boring slugging would also be heavily discouraged. Killers might still go for the occasional multi-down snowball, but intentional, hard slugging and leaving them there, instead of just hooking them, is way worse now because each hook would progress the game so much more than before. Basically, the amount of BM or problematic killer strategies, the number of easy outs, is reduced. Killers would now have to make intelligent decisions to chase the right survivors in the right areas. This is mostly the case with the current game, but the hook pool system would absolutely mandate it. Also, hooking a survivor who ran them for 2 or 3 gens and then switching targets is not a wasted investment anymore. It could actually be in the killer's best interest to survey multiple survivors and learn their playstyles in order to get quicker chases in the mid to late game. Now, there's one more easy out that I haven't talked about yet, and that is the gen lock or the 3-gen strategy. If the survivor hook pool were to be implemented, this strategy might actually become a little bit more prevalent than it is now. People are going to look for their easy out, and if the other ones don't exist, they may come to this. However, I think it would be a little bit easier to stomach in this case, because it would also be a lot harder to pull off when the match can't become a 3v1 so early on. 4 survivors can create way more split pressure than 3 can, but it would still definitely be really boring to perform or to play against. Either way, I said this would be how to fix tunneling, not the entire game. This unsolved problem is just one of the trade-offs. Honestly, I don't know what they could do to fix genlock besides changing a few problematic perks, but if you have an idea, let me know, I guess, and maybe we can turn that into a future video. Speaking of perks, let's talk a little bit more about what would happen to builds with a shared hook pool system. Killer perks that encourage you to spread hooks across multiple survivors become way more attractive. Grim Embrace, No Way Out, Gift of Pain. Because you don't get that 3v1 advantage so quickly anymore, the game would no longer punish you for not tunneling. So this opens the door to maximize the potential of these kind of perks. Buff them, introduce new ones. I think this consequence would be great for the game. To be able to spread those hooks, aura and chase perks become more valuable, maybe even over gen stalling in some cases. A coup de grace and I'm all ears meta would be legitimately exhilarating. Hex Ruin currently deactivates when the first survivor dies. This change seemed to be added in to punish using this perk while also tunneling, but since removing survivors early can't happen anymore, this unpopular pick in the current meta suddenly offers way more value overall because it would never have its own early exit, unless of course it's cleansed, but that's always the risk with hexes. You don't get punished by your perks for playing to the optimal win condition anymore. Hex Devour Hope would need a change to keep its stack requirements in line with the new pace of the game, or maybe not. This could be a very dangerous perk if it gets buffed too much. Back on the survivor side of things, Deliverance and Slippery Meat would definitely need to be reworked. Maybe they only function within the first third or first half of the hook pool and then deactivate beyond that. I think this brings along a cool perk design concept, where survivors could get different abilities when the hook pool is very full or very empty. Think about something like a hook pool based hope. Now honestly, that would probably be ridiculously strong, but it's an avenue to be explored. And you could do it with killer side too. Off the record is probably way too strong with a shared hook pool. It's already too strong. It would definitely need to be reduced to just 2 stacks per game to keep it comparable to where it is now, and keep people from using it even more offensively. 1 would probably be fine too. The perk just does a lot. DS, Decisive Strike, it already only works once, and then with the 3-second duration, I don't know if it would be more or less popular, because people definitely wouldn't want 2 quick back-to-back hooks in a shared hook pool, but then also the killer is probably less likely to do that in the first place. Or just have to be something in playtest. Because killers would be even less likely to slug, I feel like Unbreakable would also drop off, although I don't really see it that much these days anyway. It's just more the threat of the perk existing in the game is what's shaped that kind of gameplay. Reassurance might need a nerf, might be fine, because camping is also worse with these hook changes. They could hit it with a limit on consecutive uses, but I don't think it would be that big of a deal anymore. And now we get to the problems and special considerations of this shared hook pool system. Like I said way earlier, the number of hooks in the current game is way too high to be the total for the hook pool. Even if you subtract the death hooks, 8 is probably too much as well. Survivors are very powerful when they're all alive, so something more in the range of 4 to 6 hooks is probably about right. These days, after 4 hooks in a match, you can probably tell who's going to win most of the time anyway. If you think back to the variations and you want to go with the second one where the game just ends when the hook pool is depleted, you probably want to add an extra hook or 2. The on-hook interactions need to be looked at too. I think it makes enough sense for the hooked survivors to enter struggle state when the hook pool has been depleted by half, but when should they be allowed to attempt a 4% chance and pull themselves off? We probably can't allow it to happen for the whole first half of the hook pool. Survivors that want to troll and grief their teammates could destroy way more hooks than normal, and I think it would just be very toxic to enable something like that. Honestly, the 4% mechanic is kind of silly in the first place, but the game could maybe just keep track of if that survivor has been hooked or not, and only let them attempt something like that on their first hook. And I guess if we don't like the idea of that limbo state in between the first hook and the hook pool being in struggle state, you could just make any hook after the first one also be struggle state, rather than waiting for that pool to come down by half. With a reduced total hook count, if a survivor disconnected and took 3 hooks with them like it does today, that would probably spell immediate doom for everyone else. It's already rough being 3v1 and very awkward in this game system. It should probably just take away one stage from the pool. Behavior would also need to tune their skill-based matchmaking in a very different way. To kill even one survivor in this shared hook pool system, the killer has accomplished a pretty great feat of draining that pool. After that, knocking down the rest of the survivor dominoes is way easier since they'd all be on death hook or moriable. Rebalancing of what a win or a loss is and adjusting the behind-the-scenes MMR gains would be required. So that's pretty much it. The general game plan and consequences for adding a shared hook pool system to DBD in order to combat tunneling. Digest it for a little bit and maybe let me know what you think. What are the other problems that I'm not thinking of or didn't talk about? I'm sure there has to be something. Balancing an asymmetrical game is not easy. Thanks for watching this whole thing. If you want to come give me a piece of your mind, there's a link to the live stream in the description. See you on the next one.